everybody, welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It is July 13th, 2025. It's been a minute or two since we've done a live show, so we got a lot to catch up on tonight. We're going to get right into it because we got a lot of ground to cover. So let's get right into it. And we have our very first little AI graphic to sort of set the stage, because the province's approach to dealing with the disabled community of late has been, the word I think I'm looking for is gross, offensive, horrific. There's a lot of different words that one could possibly choose. And it's really important that we take a minute to talk about those things, because some of the things that the province of Alberta is doing right now is really gross. So you might be wondering why we went with that particular AI choice of Danielle Smith stealing the money from the individual in the wheelchair. Well, let's start with the basics. So to begin with, the federal government a while ago announced that they were going to be introducing some extra funding for the disabled people of Canada. They were going to do a little bit of a top-up at the time, and this has been brought up by more than a few very powerful advocates. At the time that program was being launched in Alberta to get above the poverty line, because, and this is important to remember for the rest of the conversation, it varies. The cost of living varies depending on where you live. So having a flat rate across all provinces where the cost of living varies, it maybe isn't the best way to measure things, although some people very much seem to want to only measure it that way. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. At the time, for Alberta, in order to get people above the poverty line, it would have been an extra $400 a month. The federal government came forward with $200 a month, and Danielle Smith in the UCP very quickly said, "Oh, we'll take that," because instead of allowing AISH recipients, disabled Albertans, some of the most vulnerable people in the province, to keep that money, instead of allowing for that, what Danielle Smith and the UCP decided to do was claw it back, force everybody who's on AISH and the other financial support programs to apply if they're eligible, and then they're just going to claw back the $200. So the situation for disabled folks under those circumstances hasn't changed at all, which is very bad and very gross. It's something that people have been talking about for quite some time, because it really is a very embarrassing state of affairs, given that the province of Alberta has recently been taking a victory lap on a fairly significant budget surplus. And you might think, oh, that's bad. That's not great. But of course, it does get worse, because it was recently announced, and there had been some rumblings about it for a while, but it was recently confirmed that not only are folks who are on those support programs not getting the money that we're talking about, they're also going to have to pay more than rent, more likely than not. So the way that works is, according to the CBC article from July 9th, the changes are meant to increase fairness, whatever that means, in how rent is assessed. People on government benefit programs like AISH and income support that live in community social housing pay about 17% of their income on rent. Under the revised approach, rent for social community housing tenants and housing benefit recipients will be calculated as 30% of total household income, treating household income from employment and assistance programs equally. Now, not great, but Smith has a very fascinating explanation. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty, because there's a company called Civita that provides housing. They released a letter. We're going to go through it briefly to talk about just how bad it can be for some folks. But before we do, there's a little piece that we gotta talk about, because Danny has some thoughts as to why this needs to happen.
Go ahead, Kurt. You're on with Premier Smith.
Hi, Premier Smith. I'm just curious about this clawback. In fact, there is a protest going on today at the legislature about it for AISH clients, where the federal government has tried to lift us out of poverty, and at that time it required $400. They settled on giving $200, and now the provincial government is clawing that back. And I don't quite understand, when we have the highest living costs, why they would do that.
Well, I can tell you that I don't think Alberta was the target of the federal government when they were increasing that disability benefit. It's all the other provinces, because the federal government is concerned, like our earlier caller said, that programs have such a huge drop-off when somebody goes on to living on senior supports. And Alberta is much higher than other jurisdictions. We're $400 higher than other jurisdictions. And in fact, people have been moving to Alberta just to come onto our social programs. We want to support Albertans. We want to support people who need that. But if we are so much higher than everywhere else, the programs are just going to get swamped, and it's just going to be too much for taxpayers to bear. So we want to stay consistent with what other provinces are paying. We're still higher, and we still offer our social our support benefits for medical and dental. We also are creating a new program so that those who are on income support can continue to earn an income up to $55,000 before that is clawed back. So we're trying to create more options and more different streams for those who need that support. But we also have to stay in sync with what we see in other jurisdictions. We also have one of the lowest rates of taxes in the country, and we also provide rental supplement support. So I hope with that combination of factors, you can get the support that you need.
So there it is. Danielle Smith has two fundamental arguments. The first one is we're doing so well here in Alberta. But again, that argument completely disregards the idea that there are questions about the poverty line and cost of living varying in different provinces. It completely skates past that. And that's a really big problem, because the cost of living in some of the less affluent provinces versus the cost of living in some provinces like Alberta, that historically has been one of the most affluent provinces in Canada, those are two very, very different things. But Danielle Smith is trying to compare apples to oranges because that's probably what's most convenient for her. There's a couple of other things that we have to keep in mind. With all of that Danielle Smith said, we're so generous, we're so far ahead the rest of the country. People on AISH are still below the poverty line. You can't say it enough. People on AISH are still below the poverty line. The other argument, and this is going to be important for later, it's going to be a bit of a theme of tonight's show. The other argument is the idea that it's these new Alberta people are moving. They're moving to Alberta. Oh, so many people, so much moving, coming to Alberta. It's the worst thing ever. They're coming here to take advantage of our robust social programs. And when you take a second to think about what that argument is actually saying, what Danielle Smith is advancing is the idea that people are moving to Alberta to live under the poverty line. That's what she's saying. And that's what's so ridiculous about the whole argument, because that is quite literally the argument that Danielle Smith is advancing. So, that's a thing. But let's take a look at what the details are. Let's take a look at what the nitty-gritty is for the rent changes. Because like I said, this company, Civita, out of Edmonton, they're the largest provider of assisted housing in Edmonton. They put out a letter. This was on July 9th. And in this letter, it was basically, hey, all you tenants, the provincial government has made some changes into how your rent has to be calculated. So this is coming from two ministerial directives that were signed by Jason Nixon. And because these changes have been made, you're probably going to have some questions. You're probably going to have some concerns. That's fair. So we're going to do our best to try to address them in this letter. And in this letter, they provided some examples of how things could and very likely would work out. From the example that they provided. Example of how community housing rent will be calculated for an individual receiving AISH. Drew receives AISH and works part-time. The total income is $24,500, which includes some $47 a month in supplementary benefits, which are not counted in rent. Before January 1st, 2026, when these changes take effect, $735 a month was exempted from their annual income, lowering the amount of annual income included for calculating rent. With that and personal benefits also excluded, their income used for calculating rent was $15,116. Their rent was $378 per month. After January 1st, because of the changes, the $735 a month exemption is no longer applied. Only the $47 per month in personal benefits is excluded. Income included for determining their rent will now be $24,500 minus only $564. At 30% rent geared to income, their annual rent will be $7,180. Their new rent amount will be $598 per month. Now, I know that there are going to be people who are going to go, $598 a month. Well, that's not that bad. But again, that's tied to income. It all depends on how well you're doing. And when you're on a fixed income or limited income, because you're dealing with and navigating disabilities, that's a huge hit. 30% of your income versus, again, it used to be about 17%. That's a huge change. And it is wild how the solution to making things fair under Danielle Smith and the UCP is not to say, wow, there's some people who are living under the poverty line and they're paying 17% of their income for rent. There's some other people who are paying more. We should make it equal. Let's lower it for everybody. Let's take a little bit more pressure off of everybody. Nope. What we need to do is make it more expensive. And again, it's important to keep in mind that the reason why Danielle Smith has announced that she is doing this is justified by her. You heard her in that clip. All of these people are moving to Alberta to suck on the government teat so they can live under the poverty line. It's ridiculous. Moving on from there. There is some cool. We are peppering in a little bit of good news as we go through our through this chunk. So I want to talk about the Siksika Nation for just a second, because they had a media release while we were relying on our interview episodes to get us through the last couple of weeks. And I want to take a sec to talk about that press release because it's pretty significant and it has to do with coal mining. So the Siksika Nation filed a legal challenge against the government of Alberta's decision to end a moratorium on coal development in the Rocky Mountains earlier this year. Chief Ure Crowfoot explained the reason for the lawsuit. The Rockies are treasured by everyone. They're the source of the water we all rely on, the supply abundant fish and wildlife and precious natural areas. For Siksika, the Rockies are an important part of our traditional territory and are home to some of the last areas that can be used for treaty hunting, fishing, and our traditional way of life. And they've actually upped their game a little bit because they've also, as of, I want to make sure I get the date right, July 2nd, they have applied for a judicial review because the province has been doing a super great job of responding to the legal challenges that they're the subject of. In the legal filing from July 2nd, they argue that the order is unlawful because it was made in breach of the duty to act honorably and consult owed to Siksika, particularly in light of the cumulative effects of development through the eastern slopes. It is ultra vires the minister's statutory authority, which cannot be interpreted to breach the Crown's duty to consult. It was issued in breach of the minister's duty of professional procedural fairness, and the respondent has otherwise failed to demonstrate a justified, transparent, and intelligible rationale for making the order. It goes on to talk about why this is so important. Siksika has used and continues to use the lands, waters, and resources within its traditional territory for a variety of traditional purposes, including hunting, fishing, trapping, gathering, traveling, and cultural practices as acknowledged in the Blackfoot Treaty. It is essential to Siksika's survival that it be able to use its traditional lands for a range of practices and access traditional resources, as the lands and the resources underpin their culture, tradition, collective identity, well-being, spirituality, and rights. These traditional practices conducted on these lands and waters are integral to Siksika's physical and cultural survival. Siksika has historically used and continues to extensively use the eastern slopes for travel, trade, harvesting, and ceremonial purposes. The eastern slopes continue to be indispensable to Siksika's exercise of its treaty rights and related cultural practices, the headwaters of major river systems, which provide source water vital for maintaining the health of fish and wildlife habitats in the region and are increasingly vulnerable to climate change and industrial activities, are located in the eastern slopes. And then they go on to talk about their frustration. And it's really important to again underscore the failure of consultation. For the past 20 years, Siksika has provided Alberta with significant information and evidence about the adverse impacts of coal mining and other kinds of development in the eastern slopes on its treaty rights and lands, including with respect to the cumulative impacts of other activities on their other lands. Siksika has continuously provided such notice to Alberta for many years, including through its participation in review processes for specific projects, its consultation on the C5 Forest Management Plan, SSRP and LAPH Plan, its feedback and judicial review application following the May 2020 recession of the 1976 coal policy, and most recently, its participation in the committee's public engagement process. So, it's pretty clear they're not very happy. And they have very, very good reason to be not very happy. Because as you heard me read there, one of the biggest concerns with the coal mining piece is its impact on water. And this is a piece that has been repeated by many, many people who are very, very upset about the fact that the government of Alberta has revoked it's very hard to, there's been so many revocations, it's hard to keep track. Anyways, they've said coal mining can go ahead now, which is very, very problematic for a long list of reasons. We've started doing a couple of articles on our Substack. We've got another one coming later this week. But the primary concern from everybody is, hey, we get that you like to make money to buy things, but we like to water to be alive. And this comes at the same time as, and I wish every time I have to say this, it blows my mind. It just blows my mind that I'm going to preface the next section by saying the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas on July 4th put up a tweet with a letter that she was sending to the feds. And I just want to say this again. She's the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas. What is she arguing for in this letter to the feds? Brace yourselves, because it's pretty bonkers. She wants the federal government to repeal the Impact Assessment Act and the Physical Activities Regulations. She wants the Clean Electricity Regulations repealed. She wants the Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act and associating regulations repealed. She wants amendments to the Species of Risk Act to respect the constitutional jurisdiction of the provinces. She wants the suspension of the proposed oil and gas sector greenhouse gas emissions cap regulation. Again, this is the Minister of Environment and Protected Areas for Alberta. And this is where it kind of ties into the Siksika lawsuit. Undertaking to refrain from reintroducing Bill C-61, which is a bill that died when Justin Trudeau prorogued Parliament. So the bill is not a thing anymore. It's dead. She's asking the federal government to absolutely not bring it back. And Bill C-61 was titled An Act Respecting Water Source, Water, Drinking Water, Wastewater, and Related Infrastructure on First Nations Land. And basically, what the idea behind Bill C-61 was, hey, we have all of these spaces, these communities that First Nations folks live in, and they don't have clean water. And that's not great. We should really, really get around to do something about that. And let's be clear. There is a very strong argument to be made that bill was a little bit weak sauce. It was not as strong as it could be. It didn't address things as much as it could have. There is 100% an argument to be made for that. But to say the bill did not do enough, it did not allocate enough funding, it didn't define the funding it was allocating, to get into that is totally different than saying, please don't bring that back at all. It's dead. But we are so committed to not protecting water in the province of Alberta that we would like you to just never, ever, ever bring it back. And let's talk about a little bit of context for a second here, because there are folks who they've showed up in our comments, and they've shared some thoughts about there are no active drinking bans in Canada. Well, this is from today, and this is effective as of the federal government put this up on Friday. This has been updated as of Friday. There are 38 long-term drinking water advisories in effect, and they affect 36 communities. Some of these go back literally decades. There's a First Nation in Northern Ontario that has been on a boil water advisory for almost 31 years. So to say, we're doing great, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And especially for Alberta to come out swinging against this, because when you take a look at where these are, Alberta actually has none. No long-term being the key word here, no long-term advisories in effect. But short-term, yeah, we got a few of those. At the time that Rebecca Schultz sent her letter, there were 8. Now, a couple of them got lifted, so there are 5 in Alberta right now, literally affecting thousands of folks living on First Nations land. So for Rebecca Schultz to come out and say, hey, everybody, we need to not make promises about keeping the water clean, it's very, very easy to understand why First Nations across Alberta are going, yeah, you know what, we don't trust you. So we're going to take you to court. That's entirely reasonable. Moving on from there, we got to talk about this guy. Oh, no, wait. That must have been an accident. We're not talking about that guy. We're talking about this guy. Now, this is a piece, a screen capture that we took from Ricochet Media, where the headline reads "Rebel Media Reporter," because he used to be a Rebel Media reporter, worked for white supremacist web store. Now, that piece has been up for quite some time, and there hasn't been any legal action that's caused it to go down. So that's just a fascinating little coincidence, I suppose. But the reason why we got to talk about Bexty is because for anybody who's unfamiliar, there used to be a thing called True North, and then we made a bunch of jokes about it, and we went to their office and we did a little comedy sketch highlighting how many AstroTurf organizations were running out of that particular UPS store. And they've rebranded. They're not True North anymore. They go by Juno News, and they teamed up with Bexty for reasons, I guess. Bexty still does the counter signal, but he also works with Juno News. And he went ahead and he got himself an interview, which is, I mean, we've put in multiple requests. Danny keeps saying no, but somehow Bexty, he got himself an interview with Danielle Smith, and they shared some thoughts about immigration.
The entire national zeitgeist on immigration has changed.
It has.
When the Fair Deal panel was happening to now,
Yeah.
there's completely different opinion on immigration.
Totally true.
And I think maybe, what we've heard from the Alberta government has shifted as well. I think it's fair to say.
You know what? When we started off, I had just gotten elected when the Alberta's Calling campaign had started. And it was important because we'd had a quarter after quarter of out-migration. We were some of the first to get rid of the COVID restrictions. And so we were ready to build again and ready to grow again. And it was looking as well like there was increased enthusiasm to invest in the oil and gas sector. So there was a very good reason why we were doing that Alberta's Calling campaign. We were calling to those who were unemployed Canadians in other parts of the country to come to Alberta. What we didn't anticipate was that the federal government was going to completely let off all controls of all streams of immigration at that time. Temporary foreign workers, asylum seekers, international students, as well as the other immigration streams. I think that 1 year period, instead of a normal amount of immigration and newcomers arriving, which would be about 1% of the population, so maybe around 400,000 people a year, They had 1.8 million, and you've seen the result of it. The reason why housing prices have spiked, why food affordability has spiked, why affordability on every front has spiked, is just because if you have too many people chasing too few jobs, too few homes, and too little employment, you're just going to end up causing problems. So the federal government blew it. It's such a tragedy because Alberta is probably one of the most welcoming places for newcomers on the entire planet. Our founding story from 1905 was one where we reached out to the world and said, hey, come here and help us build this place. And diaspora after diaspora after diaspora has. And we have one of the most diverse populations here. So people want newcomers. They want them to come here, be Canadian, be Albertan, leave their historic hatreds behind when they leave their home countries. And I think what people are now observing is that it just went too far. And I don't like seeing the fact that the sentiments towards immigration have changed almost 180. I think people want to continue having people who will come here, contribute to the economy, and be able to grow this province, but it's got to be a reasonable level.
What I hear is, I mean, it's, I guess, similar. It's a little different. They want jobs for their children.
Yep.
They want them to be able to go work at the Tim Hortons down the road,
Correct.
like they did when they were a kid. They want to be able to afford groceries. They want to be able to take their kids to the hospital and go through an emergency line when they're having a problem,
Yep.
and be seen within a few hours. And they don't even view that, I think, as, oh, Danielle Smith is not spending enough on healthcare. They think there's too many people in line in front of them.
And I think there's legitimacy to that.
I think there's legitimacy to that, is what the Premier of Alberta says when Cian Bexty, who, according to that Ricochet media report, used to work at a white supremacist store, says, oh, the problem isn't healthcare spending. It's there's too many people in the line because there's too many immigrants. And there's something profoundly disingenuous about Danielle Smith doing this interview and hedging, because you can hear she's doing the hedging a little bit, because she says, oh yeah, the feds opened up the immigration, totally out of control, cause of all of our problems. But it just breaks my heart to hear people talking bad about immigration. But yeah, no, they're the reason why hospitals are failing. It is bonkers. And again, this is one of the things that Danielle Smith is very, very good at. She'll put out the little hate nuggets for all of the little hate rabbits to munch on. And then she'll put out like a cursory, oh yeah, I don't like that people are hating on the immigrants so much. But she follows it up with, there is legitimacy to the concerns that immigrants are overwhelming our healthcare system. It's not a funding issue. But that's not the only particularly controversial clip that came out of that conversation.
If we were responsible for choosing all the migrants that come to Alberta, and we set it at a reasonable level, which might be 1% of the population, that'd be about 50,000 people. Anyone else who comes here who doesn't have an Alberta permit, we wouldn't pay for the supports for them, because our program is very different. Our program ensures that somebody who comes here has a job. So they're already coming here as a taxpayer. And if you're coming here as a taxpayer, of course you're entitled to the same benefits as everyone else. What we don't want to do is encourage people to come to Alberta just to take advantage of rich social programs, whether it's daycare or education or healthcare or AISH. We want to make sure that people understand that there's a social contract here, that you have to work to the best of your ability and be a contributor. And we provide a social safety net for those who fall through the cracks. But I don't think Albertans want to be taken advantage of.
Albertans are being taken advantage of by the folks coming to Alberta to access subpar healthcare and live below the poverty line on AISH, which is a difficult program to get on anyways. And you have to have significant disabilities in order to get on it. So not sure how that works. But there's a new piece there, the withholding the services. Maybe we could, if people come to Alberta and they're not the right kind of people, then maybe we could just say no, despite the Constitution. You don't get to have access to education. You don't get to have access to healthcare. And despite daycare being a national program by and large, you don't get to have access to daycare. I'm not sure. Maybe I'm wrong. but I'm not sure that there's been any evidence out there that has said, you know what people are doing? They're moving to Alberta for the daycare. I haven't seen it. If I'm missing something, send us a DM, throw it in the chat, because would love to hear more. But again, we've heard Danielle Smith. Oh, immigrants, they're overwhelming the AISH. They're coming here to take advantage of us. Immigrants, they're ruining the healthcare. Oh, it's just the worst. Hey, what did Danielle Smith have as goals for immigration? Gosh, just a year ago.
The fact that so many people have come to our province, I look at that as a positive, and we want to keep that going. That's why I've said, let's have an aggressive target to double our population. I'm going to put this out there because I've said that in the throne speech, and I want people to understand how important that is. We have to be that bastion of liberty, and people are going to want to come here, and we want to embrace them, and we want to be able to build this place out so that we can actually have the political clout in Alberta that we deserve. Because right now, we're being treated as a junior partner by Ottawa. And if we end up with the strongest economy, we'll double our oil production.
You want to go from rough numbers, you probably know the number better than me, 4.7 million, roughly?
We're almost at 5 million. We'll
okay.
be at 5 million
so you want to double it to 10 million?
Yep, I do.
Why?
Because then we'll be the second largest province. We'll be the second most populous
province. Where are 5
province.
million people going to come from?
They're going to come from the rest of the country, number one. We're also recruiting people internationally to come here from South Africa, from India, from China, who are investing in our province, who are getting engineering and technical degrees, who are building our province out. I that's one thing I should say is that I have always felt like we should be embracing everything that we have to offer is so unique in the country that we have an obligation to be that bastion of freedom. And I think we should welcome the people who want to come here and enjoy it with us. And so that's why we have to take that multi-track approach where we want to build out our economy as well as create all of that opportunity.
One final one on the doubling of the population. You caught me on a curveball there. How long to double?
The projections I've seen have said that we could get there somewhere around 2050, just based on the kind of, when you think of where Lougheed was. I mean, when Lougheed came in, I think we were only at 1.3 million people.
What year was that?
He came in 71.
71.
And so we're now approaching 5 million. So we've seen a doubling in the space of 50 years. So will we double again by 2050? I think we need to be aspirational. I think that we need to understand that bringing in more people to help us build this place and celebrate all of the things that make us unique, I think that's a net positive for the country, and we should keep on doing that.
Well, that's a thought for people to think on and probably yell at the text line and everything else.
Now, in fairness, I guess, to Danielle, to Dani, she did get a little bit of feedback from a lot of different folks on the far right who had some concerns with increasing immigration to 10 million people by 2025. And she didn't really change her position on it it took her about 6 months before she decided to start. Oh, I could blame the feds for that too. And in the process of doing that, one of the things that she said was, if we could get the population, you heard her say it in that clip, if we could get the population of Alberta to 10 million people, we'd have more people than Quebec. We could do whatever we wanted. And this is an undercurrent, a recurring theme, if you will, in a lot of the policy ideas that Danielle Smith floats forward. She gets an idea about a thing that she might have heard somewhere, and she decides that she's going to pursue that full throttle without putting any thought whatsoever into what the unintended or unexpected consequences of that could be. And in this case, she didn't have the wherewithal to recognize that her right-wing base would lose their goddamn minds at the prospect of increasing immigration. And lose their goddamn minds they have. Because the Alberta Prosperity Project released just a little while ago their fully costed... I told myself before we did the show I was going to be able to say fully costed without laughing. I couldn't do it. That's on me. I take full responsibility. They would their fully costed fiscal plan for an independent Alberta. Now, the numbers are imaginary, fictional, don't know what else to say. I'm not going to get into the fully costing part, because the real core of the fully costed plan has a good chunk to do with their immigration and deportation policies, because no far right wing Christo fascist organization, I think I'm safe to say that about the APP. I really, really do. Would advance a policy without also having in it some really horrible things. Let's take a look. One of the big things that the Alberta Prosperity Project proposes in their fully costed plan is a points-based system for who gets to be an Albertanian. I think that's what I'm going to use from now on, Albertanians. And it doles out points based on a number of different qualifications. Education. The more education you have, the more points that you get. Your language proficiency. English, of course, we're going to do away with the French as having anything to do with our culture, despite the fact that when you get into northern and central Alberta, there's a very large French-speaking population. Work experience and trade qualifications. There's points for that. Here's where it starts to get gross. Canadian citizenship, 40 points if you were born lifelong Canadians without a criminal record. If you moved here and you're a Canadian citizen, if you got your citizenship through going through the immigration process, you only get 20 points. You are less Canadian. Just to be clear, if you were born here, you are double the Canadian that somebody who is also a Canadian citizen. I mean, we're really saying the quiet part out loud at this point. But we've also got some subjectivity. Merit, exceptional qualifications with superior knowledge and skills can get you some more points. Age, you get points if you're in the good child rearing years, 21 to 49. Self-sufficient. And this is where it also, they're really saying the quiet part out loud here. Health, no serious illnesses. If you have no serious illnesses, because we don't want you coming here and taking advantage of our AISH, where you could again live below the poverty line. If you have any serious illnesses, you can't be an Albertanian. Also, you cannot have had any experimental RNA injections. Passing mark. The passing mark is 67. But as ridiculous as that is, they do have a plan for getting rid of people as well if you don't meet the mark. If you have any sort of criminal conviction, then they'll boot you out right away. The estimated volume that they're looking at, the non-citizen population, they're looking at deporting anywhere between 150 to 190,000, 10,000 to 20,000 temporary residents. It all really depends. The total criminal deportations that they would be looking at would be anywhere between 4,000 to 15,000 because of the backlog. So just because you had a criminal conviction and you voted for the APP in the next provincial election doesn't mean you're safe. They will still remove you, and they estimate that 8,000, up to 8,000 people will go annually, according to their fully costed plan. They get into the numbers, the mechanism, and I love this part. Canada must accept ineligible non-citizens, whether it's because they didn't have enough points or they had criminal convictions, and deport them as per a bilateral agreement. So Canada will at some point sign a treaty with Albertania saying that, if people get in vaccines, you can kick them out and we'll take them. Which would actually probably be a good deal for Canada now that I say that out loud. Alberta escorts individuals to Canada, example, Ottawa by air, with Canada handling reintegration or deportation. And then they have the volume, the idea. How many people for points-based failures? How many people do they think they're going to be kicking out for just not meeting their point system? At 65,000 to 106,000. For criminal convictions, anywhere between 4,800 to 18,000. They estimate the total ineligible people who are living in the province of Alberta right now who would be kicked out of the province at being as high as 124,000. Now, you might wonder, Why do we bring up the Alberta Prosperity Project and their immigration alignment in some ways with Danielle Smith? It's not like Danielle Smith said that they were her plan B. It's not like Danielle Smith said that they were her or else if the feds don't listen, is it?
Quebec, for centuries, has been a minority, a linguistic minority, cultural, economic minority, but they did something different. They had an or else added to the end of it. How far are you willing to go? Are you willing to say, we want these things or else? At what stage would you, for example, invoke the Clarity Act as clarified by the Supreme Court? For example, calling a referendum on the Clarity Act question of secession. Do you have an or else in mind? What is it and what would make you use it? And if not, how are you serious? And I'll start off with Danielle Smith on that one.
The or else is Dennis Modry and the Alberta Prosperity Project. It's true. We proclaimed into law on April the 7th the Citizen Initiative Act, which gives the people the power to collect signatures for a petition campaign to propose an amendment. If it's a simple matter of policy, it's a 10% threshold. If it's a constitutional change, it's a 20% threshold. That would mean 600,000 signatures. And as I understand it, Dr. Modry has 1 million people on his database. So part of when I decided I wanted to run, I knew how important it was to make sure that we addressed the issues of autonomy. And I talked to Dr. Modry as one of my first steps. I said, let's try this together. Let's get as much autonomy as we can. Full well knowing that he's got the power, you've got the power. If we're not successful, and this is why I take your movement very, very seriously and why Justin Trudeau should take it very, very seriously too, because you have the power to be able to be the or else.
That was Danielle Smith speaking at one of the UCP leadership debates. She was answering a question posed to her by Ezra Levant, who was goading her, apparently, to bring the separatism question into play. And who was the host of that debate? Why, it was the Alberta Prosperity Project. So Danielle Smith's relationship with the Alberta Prosperity Project and Dr. Dennis Modry was one of the first people she reached out to so that they could work together. Seems to be fairly well established. And where that starts to also show through a little bit is in the Alberta Next Panel. So, for anybody who's unfamiliar, Danielle Smith launched the Alberta Next Panel. We're going to spend some time unpacking some of the things around that launch because there's some fascinating rabbit holes that we could not help but take ourselves down. Basically what it is Danielle Smith wants to campaign on the taxpayer's dime for the next few months. And so she has assembled this crack panel of a bunch of MLAs and very friendly UCP people. And then there's some really odd ones. There's some ones that it's just like, did not see that coming. And they put together, we're going to travel the province. We're going to have these town halls that we're going to pre-market to UCP members, and then we'll open up the tickets. The tickets will be free, but don't worry, we'll stream it in case anybody can't get on. All of this, again, on the taxpayer dime. But they also launched a website, and that website has been the subject of a lot of criticism, because in order to engage with any of the survey questions on the website, you have to. There's no way around it. No matter how hard you try. And people have been trying. You have to watch these infomercials on the various topics. And you'd better believe that they produced one on immigration. And we're going to play the guts of it for you because it really is that bad that it needs to be highlighted.
As all Canadians intuitively understand, the number of newcomers entering the country each year needs to be sustainable, and everyone wanting to come should be committed to upholding the Canadian values of hard work, love of freedom, and peaceful coexistence. Sadly, Justin Trudeau's Liberals upended Canada's immigration system for over a decade by instituting an open borders policy that permitted millions to enter Canada each year, often without any sort of proper vetting, job prospects, or needed employment skills. The results have been disastrous. Housing prices have skyrocketed. Unemployment keeps increasing as immigration outpaces job growth. And sadly, many of the divisions and disputes that plague other countries have begun making their way into ours. Further, Ottawa has ignored the request of Alberta to cut refugee claimants and student visas, and instead permit Alberta, like Quebec, to select a more sustainable and targeted number of economic migrants better able to contribute to our province's economy. What can Alberta do about the situation? Quite a bit, actually. You see, under the Constitution, immigration is a shared area of responsibility between the federal and provincial governments, which makes sense. Essentially, the federal government gets to decide who they let into Canada, but it's up to the provinces to provide the vast majority of the social programs that newcomers need. So obviously, we should have a say about who is coming here. If Alberta isn't satisfied with the number or economic qualifications of newcomers moving to our province, we may have the option to withhold provincial social programs to any non-citizen or non-permanent resident who does not have an Alberta-approved immigration status. This would likely encourage more sustainable numbers of immigration overall, while supporting the entry of newcomers that can contribute to our provincial economy. If Alberta went this direction, Ottawa could decide to fight Alberta on this issue in the courts, and there would be some additional costs in taking a more hands-on approach to immigration. However, much, if not all of that cost, could be offset in corresponding savings to our social programs. So, should Alberta take more control of the immigration system in this way, or continue with the status quo?
And if you watch that video, then you get to answer some questions where the answers are, would you like to do the thing because it's awesome or because it's super cool? Obviously, that's not the exact verbiage that they use, but it's pretty darn close. And that's the format that all of the questions use. There's no place within the surveys to be able to say, I don't want to do this. I don't think that we should be withholding social programs from anyone. And I don't think that the fact that we could maybe save a little bit of money on social programs justifies a constitutional war with the federal government that we would lose because these pieces are fundamentally unconstitutional. So there's so much to unpack in this clip. The Canadian values of love of freedom and hard work. There's a lot of different Canadian values that are out there. Most of them are defined. Hard work is not one I've seen in the charter. Now, I'm not saying that hard work is bad. I'm a big believer in hard work. But to say that that is a core Canadian value is a little bit of a stretch at the very least. To make the argument that housing has gone up solely because of immigration is profoundly dishonest and misleading. To make the argument that employment has gone up solely because of immigration is the exact same thing. And when we talk about the idea of importing conflict, that is a pretty big dog whistle. Because if we're going to say there are people coming to Alberta from parts of the world where there is grave injustice, when they come to Canada, they can't care about that injustice anymore, suggests that one of the core values of being Canadian is not giving a rat's ass about what sort of injustice is happening in other places in the world. Now, there are for sure examples where people have maintained conflicts, but that's not the same thing. It should be, given Canada's history as one of the great peacekeepers of the world, Canada being a country that would send troops to ensure that areas that are having conflict have some of that conflict pushed down a little bit. That's a core Canadian value. and to suggest that people who are coming to Canada should no longer be able to speak up against injustice in the part of the world they're from or any other parts of the world is profoundly un-Canadian. For the record, before we get into the really fun stuff with the launch, there is a back door to the website. So if you go to the Alberta Next website and you go to the ideas for discussion section of the website and you scroll down a little bit and you get to share your ideas, that opens up an unrestricted, unfettered, you don't have to watch any lame-ass propaganda videos, you don't have to answer any lame-ass multiple choice questions that ultimately lead you to the same conclusion anyways. You can speak your mind there. And we have it on good authority that all of the panelists will read those submissions. So if you want to say that you think that this exercise in propaganda, which is really what it is, and it blows my mind that that's a thing that I can say, because they force feed you these videos that have many factual errors in them that have already been well documented, and then they give you questions that you don't get to actually provide any input with. That's propaganda. If you want to bypass that, you can go through the steps that I just said, ideas for discussion, share your ideas, and you can write in. I think this is offensive. I think that this whole thing is profoundly un-Albertan. I think it's profoundly un-Canadian. What are you even doing here? That's our little gift to Alberta. That thing is a thing. But we got to talk about the launch announcement because there's so much going on here. And to start with, there's two clips that we're gonna play. The first one is some questions that were asked by journalist Carrie Tate of the Globe and Mail. And if you can, I'm going to ask you to multitask a little bit here, because I want you to not only listen to the questions and the answers, but watch what the gentleman in the back, Adam Legg, does when this question is asked, because it's so worth it.
My question is, we've seen that your former Chief of Staff, Marshall Smith, was living in a house owned by Sam Mraiche's sister. People in your office were frequently going to hockey games. There's allegations that Mr. Smith was advocating on behalf of private companies tied to Mr. Mraiche. What was your relationship with Mr. Mraiche?
I saw him socially a couple of times, and the same thing that I have with many people who seek to have a relationship with our government. I have formal meetings with them, sometimes meet with them one-on-one, but I would say that it was a very professional relationship.
And when was the last time that you met with him?
I don't know, over a year ago.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, before we get to the meat and the potatoes of the clip, I hope y'all caught it. I hope that y'all caught that when that question was asked, Mr. Legg, oh, what's this on the floor over here? I should just scooch over a bit and take a look at it. And then I'm just going to scooch all the way out of frame because I don't want anything to do with this dumpster fire, would be the subtext if that had happened more than once. But the questions were, what was the relationship with Sam Mraiche of MH Care? And she's very, very clear. It was very professional. Oh, that's a fascinating word to throw out. It gets to be a little important later. Many people want to have a relationship with the government. Oh, that's a very important turn of phrase to keep in mind for maybe a little bit later. But the follow-up was, when was the last time that you saw Mr. Mraiche? And Danielle Smith said, oh, it was over a year ago. And it didn't take very long for us to figure out, well, that was some bullshit that she threw down there. And I know, and we addressed this when we posted it on all of our socials at first. I know, and sure enough, there were a few people that were like, "Oh, that's just such a small distinction. You're just splitting hairs now." Let's be clear. If the allegations surrounding what the NDP have called the corrupt care scandal are accurate, we are talking about $1 billion. That is with a B. That is not 6 zeros. It's 9. $1 billion of taxpayers' money that was spent with this organization. And that's just what has been made public in these allegations. That's a lot of money. And there's some litigation going on around that. For anyone who's unfamiliar, I'm being sued for $6 billion by MH Care. That litigation is ongoing. But there's also the lawsuits that are going on with the former AHS CEO, Athana Manzalopoulos, which is not nothing. The Premier's former chief of staff has launched I think it's $12 million lawsuit against Athana Manzalopoulos for her lawsuit against the government alleging wrongful dismissal, and also the Globe and Mail. There's a lot going on. Everybody's suing everybody these days. I'm not currently suing anyone. I'm just the subject. With all of this fraught legal environment, one would think that if you were going to answer any questions about the situation in general, you would have a very high degree of specificity with your words. If you were going to say something and in the confidence that it was true, you would want to be 100% confident, because again, we're talking about $1 billion in taxpayers' money, allegedly. If you didn't have the confidence to answer the question with 100% confidence, then the correct thing to do, one would assume, if one had been given legal counsel by multiple lawyers for the government, that you would say, you know what, I don't have the exact date of the last time that I spoke to Mr. Mraiche. I will certainly do my best to get that information for you. Please follow up with my press secretary and we'll never respond to your question, or something to that effect. That's one of the more responsible choices. Danielle Smith, though, nope, she said it's over a year, except it wasn't, because it didn't take very long of going through Facebook to find that last year, bearing in mind this press conference was on June 24th, 2025. Last year during Stampede, a group of people, largely led by Last Door Recovery, put together a sober stampede. And at that sober stampede, in this picture here, we've got ourselves, it's quite the picture, because we've got ourselves a great big deal hockey player. And then we've got ourselves the man in black, appears to be Mr. Sam Mraiche. And then we've got ourselves the director of community outreach, I believe his name is, for Last Door. And then we have Marshall Smith. And then we have the Premier of Alberta less than a year ago having a chat with all of these gentlemen. So let's be clear. Danielle Smith was not truthing well when she answered that question. Whether or not she was deliberately attempting to mislead, only Danielle Smith knows the depths of Danielle Smith's soul as to what her intent was. But we can certainly say that what she said to Carrie Tate of the Globe and Mail was factually false. And again, when we're in a legal environment, a litigious environment that is as fraught as the current one is, one would think, especially if one is about to say what we're going to play for you next, that one would be doing their very, very, very level best to make sure that they were coming from a place of either not answering the question or at least being accurate. That's that clip. We're going to play another clip now. And I want to be clear. I think that you should watch what the gentleman in the background, Adam Legg, does again. And I'm just going to let the clip speak for itself.
You referred to formal meetings with Mr. Mraiche. Mr. Mraiche and none of his agents or companies are listed on the lobbyist registry. Does it concern you that the government is dealing with, and you have been dealing with somebody who is not playing by the government's own rules regarding lobbying registration?
Well, I would say that there's a lot of lawsuits that are going on as a result of various allegations that have been made, statements of claim and statements of defense. including claims against the Globe and Mail. I don't know if there's any against your media outlet, but I would just rather let the process play out and see what the truth is. There's a lot of competing stories. There's a lot of truth, I think, that still needs to be on the table.
I'm sorry, you were saying that the truth is that you were just saying that you were had formal meetings with somebody who was not
I said
a lobbyist.
Well, I said I had informal meetings, as I do with a lot of people, on a lot of different issues. As you know, the person in question didn't have any contracts with the government of Alberta. So that's, I guess, the other part. I don't know what his obligation is to register as a lobbyist. I suppose that'll come out through the process.
Okay, let's go back one more time and listen to what Danny said.
My question is, we've seen that your former Chief of Staff, Marshall Smith, was living in a house owned by Sam Mraiche's sister. People in your office were frequently going to hockey games. There's allegations that Mr. Smith was advocating on behalf of private companies tied to Mr. Mraiche. What was your relationship with Mr. Mraiche?
I saw him socially a couple of times, and the same thing that I have with many people who seek to have a relationship with our government. I have formal meetings with them, sometimes meet with them one-on-one, but I would say that it was a very professional relationship.
When was the last time that you met with him?
I don't know, over a year ago.
Okay, thank you very much.
It was a professional relationship. Sometimes I have formal meetings with people who want to have a relationship, not with me. Not with me, because I am a charming and bellicose speaker. No, with the government. She didn't say that she had informal meetings. She initially characterized them as social engagements, but she immediately pivoted, no gun to her head, to, I take, it's like all the meetings I take with people who want to have a relationship with the government. That was very, very professional, is how I would characterize it, as professional. So it doesn't get to be both. It doesn't get to be social and professional. It doesn't get to be, it has nothing to do with government, but he's exactly the same kind of person that wants to have business with government. It doesn't get to be all of those things all at the same time. It doesn't get to be those. And let's talk about the lobbying piece for a little bit, because to start with, let's talk about the folks in that picture. Because again, Danny didn't truth. I'm not sure what the exact verbiage would be. She did not truth well about when she last saw Sam Mraiche. And we were curious with the lobbying piece, given that Last Door has got a very long-term, professional, close relationship with the government. Are the principals? Is the gentleman in that picture there, Giuseppe Ganci, is he registered as a lobbyist in Alberta? Oh, he's not. He's not. Is Last Door registered as a lobbyist in Alberta? No, they're not. Which is weird, because Last Door has a long relationship with the government of Alberta. They built an app for the government, My Recovery Plan, which sees Albertans data being held by a company in BC, which is Last Door. They've worked with the government on many, many projects, not only the Sober Stampede, but they've also done numerous conferences. And they just scored this massive contract. The province spent $9.2 million to renovate a provincially owned building in Southeast Calgary for a new recovery center. And this is a big pie to have a piece of, because the Alberta government says it will spend up to an estimated $350 million on 11 recovery communities. This is not nothing. These are long-term relationships. But Danielle Smith also said in there, well, I don't know if he needs to be, if Sam Mraiche or MH Care would need to be a lobbyist. They don't have direct contracts with the government. Well, let's take a look at what being a lobbyist means and what's required of it. And let's see if there are any other organizations, maybe that are tangentially or directly, I don't know, related to this whole state of affairs. And as we've talked about on the show before, there is, in fact, a company that is fairly directly related to this whole conversation that did lobby. They registered as lobbyists and that's Alberta Surgical Group. They used P3 Capital Partners, Inc. to lobby Alberta Health Services. They're now lobbying both Alberta Health and Acute Care Alberta. But they have multiple years where they were registered as lobbyists for Alberta Health Services. So let's be clear. Just because somebody is not directly lobbying to the government of Alberta, that doesn't mean that they don't have to register as a lobbyist. And we're going to prove that in just a second. Why is this particularly pertinent? Why is this particularly relevant? Because while Alberta Surgical Group was lobbying using P3 Capital Partners, and again, we could go down this whole rabbit hole, but you should really watch our Skybox episodes. They were using the finance minister's cousin, Doug Horner, to lobby the government, and one of them was Doug Horner. So Nate Horner's cousin was lobbying him on behalf of Alberta Surgical Group. And allegedly, one of the things that they were lobbying over was the expansion of chartered surgical facilities. And as we have established, there are 4 companies that share owners of Alberta Surgical Group, and Sam Mraiche, as well as a pretty prominent individual within the MH Care universe. So there's some overlap here. It's not inconsequential that Sam Mraiche should maybe be registered as a lobbyist, especially when we talk about all of the hockey games. But let's take a look at what the definition of lobbying is under Alberta law, because it is pretty pertinent to what we're talking about here. For both organization lobbyists and consultant lobbyists, lobby means to communicate with the public office holder directly or through grassroots communication. I suppose that would be social functions in an attempt to influence matters relating to the development, enactment, introduction, amendment, passage, or defeat of legislation, the development, establishment, amendment, or termination of any program, policy, directive, or guideline of the government or of a prescribed provincial entity, the awarding of any grant or financial benefit on behalf of the government or a prescribed provincial entity. Whoa, we're going to get into that in just a sec. Decisions by executive council or a member of executive council to transfer from the Crown and for consideration, all or part of, or any interest in, or asset of any business, enterprise, or institution that provides goods or services to the Crown, a prescribed provincial entity, or the public, or decisions by the executive council or a member of executive council to have the private sector, instead of the Crown, provide goods and services to the government. So, by the definition of lobbying, if you are meeting with the government and you have, I'm going to paraphrase, you have a goal that you would like the government to help you with, you're a lobbyist. So it would seem to me that if the government was, I don't know, I'm no lawyer, I'm no legal expert, but just on the face of it, in the case of Last Door, it would seem to me that if you were getting gifted a building with $9.2 million worth of renovations to run a program that you're going to make money off of, you maybe should be registered as a lobbyist. And if you're having a relationship with, what was that? Prescribed provincial entity. We should probably look up what that definition is. Provincial entity means a provincial agency as defined in the Financial Administration Act and includes a management body within the meaning of the Alberta Housing Act and a regulatory health authority and a subsidiary health corporation under the Regional Health Authorities Act. So, basically, any company that the government creates, whether we're talking about something like, I don't know, Alberta Health Services or Acute Care Alberta or Recovery Alberta, those are provincial entities. If you want to influence them, you have to be registered as a lobbyist. Let's take it a step further with all of this, because we know that Danielle Smith was given the gift of playoff hockey games, hockey tickets. We also know that multiple other ministers were given the gifts of playoff hockey tickets. Gift benefits from person other than the Crown. A member breaches this act if the member or to the knowledge of the member the member's spouse or adult independent partner or minor child accepts a gift from a person other than the Crown, a gift, fee, or other benefit that is connected directly or indirectly to the performance of the minister's office. Danielle Smith said in that clip, well, I take meetings. He wanted to have a relationship with the government. And maybe he gave some of my ministers tickets. That's not conflict of interest-y, is it? To most people, it absolutely would be. But of course, all of this is taken within the context of, you have to know, though. You have to know, like, who really knows what the rules around lobbying are. You'd have to have either an interest in the subject because you host a podcast, or I don't know, maybe if you've ever worked as a lobbyist, you might know about these things. Oh, wait, what's this? This is the record of Danielle Smith with with the lobbyist registry when she was registered as a lobbyist and lobbying Alberta Health for she wanted to I'm not even making this up. She was lobbying to let doctors provide ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, but also she wanted to discuss a new accountability model for delivering healthcare that would split the roles of purchaser, provider, and performance oversight. But there she is. And if we take a look at what were the government departments that she lobbied, there's a boatload of them, and one of them was Alberta Health. So I guess the moral of the story is, if you wanted to ask somebody about what the rules are for lobbying, you would probably have to ask someone who was working as a lobbyist or who directly oversaw any changes since that time where they worked as a lobbyist to any of the rules. I guess you'd have to ask them. Hard to really say for sure. It's all very, very complicated. And we're going to use this as an opportunity to pivot to some other updates. But before we do, we just want to talk about this little piece right here, because this is bonkers. This is truly, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in the province of Alberta that many people should find offensive. But if you're going to find something really offensive, this has got to be near the top of the list, because the province of Alberta built in Edmonton a building for orthopedic surgeries. It's a purpose-built building for orthopedic surgeries. Built it a few years back, dumped a lot of money into it. And there were some staffing issues. The surgery group came forward and said, hey, we can fix this for, I think it was $240,000 a year. We can have this place up and running 24/7. We can be doing publicly funded, publicly delivered orthopedic surgeries in the building that was built using public funds to do it 24/7, $240,000. What do you say, government of Alberta? And they said, yeah, nah, we're not going to do that. And so the closure at the Royal Alexandra Hospital, orthopedics, reduction of day surgery cases, reassignment of OR time to other surgical services. Reason, due to a clinical personnel shortage. And this is the offensive part. The start date was July 2nd, 2024. The anticipated end date is now January 5th, 2026. A year, almost 2 years. This purpose-built facility has been closed. Well, Nate Horner's cousin has been lobbying him to expand chartered for-profit surgical facilities in the province of Alberta. Anyways, a couple of updates on the MH Care file so that we can be covering all the bases. There's a fascinating little story that came out about MH Care, where MH Care actually has a report. Well, they don't have the report. That's part of the problem. There was a report that was commissioned by AISH in the fall of 2024. Now, it gets a little complicated because the exact details of what version of that report is open to some debate. It's a privately held report. It's the product of solicitor-client privilege. So AHS has said we don't have to give that up. It's under legal protection, and it was done to investigate the. I'll just read from the article here. MH Care Medical Corp, owned by Sam Mraiche, has asked the province and Alberta Health Services to distribute a report AHS commissioned in the fall of 2024. The health authority, under its former chief executive, who's currently suing the government for wrongful dismissal, hired Borden Ladner Gervais LLP to investigate deals for certain private surgical facilities, including 2 owned in part by Mr. Mraiche. The examination was later broadened to include MH Care and related entities. MH Care would like to see that report released because they say that it will exonerate them, which is a piece of the puzzle that would be fascinating to have. Danielle Smith was recently asked about the children's medication that I'm currently being sued for calling Tylenot. What do you have to say?
Your government struck a deal to offload that batch of children's medicine that we got stuck with a few years ago to the tune of $70 million. Does that indicate lessons learned, and will we get any of that money back? And if so, could it help offset the cost of COVID vaccines for seniors?
Well, let's remember, that was probably the last contract in the COVID era. Remember, during COVID, there were all kinds of supply constraints. And so there were many, many different contracts that were signed, and trying to get product from wherever we possibly could, whether it's for ventilators or masks or testing kits or so on and so forth. But when I came in and we'd already turned the page, I think, and the virus was becoming less virulent, we started seeing more normalization in our supply chains. The last one was the children acetaminophen and ibuprofen. And we were being told at the time that it could potentially be 3 years before the supply would stabilize. And there was no way that we were going to have families having to crush up adult Tylenol or go online or fly to Mexico, as the stories that we were hearing. That was a safety risk. So made a decision at the time to use a new company, Atabay Pharmaceutical. And the contract was written so that it was done in batches. So the first batch that they sent us for was $20 million. And the supply chains normalized. We went back to using our normal product, and we've just signed an arrangement with a private nonprofit to use the remainder of that product in war-torn areas of the world where they don't have access to medicine. So I think the first batch has gone out to some African countries, and we're pleased that somebody's going to be able to make use of it. For the remaining $50 million, we've been working for 2 years with Health Canada to get approval to have a high dosage acetaminophen for use in hospital as an alternative to opioids. Anyone who's been in hospital knows that sometimes you have to have fentanyl, sometimes it's hydromorphone, sometimes it's morphine. And we want to be able to have another type of heavy duty painkiller that doesn't have opioids in it. So we've been waiting for Health Canada's approval on that. And once that's approved, I suspect that will be the balance of the remaining contract with Atabay.
Now, there's some things that Danny said in there that weren't entirely true. She's having that truthy problem again, because if you take a look at the actual payment that was made, the payment was $70 million. That's that. So that's part of the reason why MH Care continues, as per the Globe and Mail reporting, to hold on to roughly $49 million of the money, going on for like 2 or 3 years now. I imagine the interest on that is not inconsequential. I don't know for sure. But Danielle Smith's pitch there is that we're going to flip that money instead of using it for more of the children's meds. And I have to just take a second to give Danny some props, which is bonkers for me. She didn't call it Tylenol. We see this over and over and over again from politicians who are trying to dumb down the narrative for the public, where they insist on calling it children's Tylenol. Tylenol is a brand name. You can't call anything other than Tylenol, period. And lots of people make that mistake. It drives me crazy. That's one of the reasons why the whole pun came around. But Danny called it acetaminophen and ibuprofen. That part, 100% true. The idea that you can give people high dose acetaminophen is bullshit. It's just bullshit. There is a lethal dose of Tylenol. There's a safe range of how much Tylenol you can give someone, how much acetaminophen you can give someone in a day. It doesn't matter whether it's the brand name stuff or the off-brand stuff. Acetaminophen is metabolized in the liver. If you push too much of it into the liver, it damages the liver. And I'm not speaking out of turn here because there's been plenty of physicians, including ICU physicians, who have said, what the hell is this you're talking about? It's not a thing. You can give, there are formulations of IV acetaminophen, but the dosing remains the same. For most people, the maximum dose of Tylenol that you can take in a day is 4,000 to 5,000 milligrams. That's it. There's no higher dose version of that your liver is going to be able to tolerate. Period. If you give it intravenously, there's actually an argument to be made that the number goes down. And anybody who's ever had to manage chronic pain or severe pain knows that there is a hierarchy of pain medications. And sometimes, for some things, acetaminophen, ibuprofen, Tylenol, Advil, whatever we're going to call it, that's enough. But sometimes it's not. And when we start to talk about how much stronger is morphine than Tylenol, how much stronger is fentanyl than Tylenol, how much stronger is hydromorph than Tylenol, we're talking about orders of magnitude in regards to how much more the opioids are to manage severe pain. And to say, nah, we're just going to create this new category of high-dose Tylenol. I mean, let's remember, this is the same person who was lobbying to let physicians prescribe hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. So maybe we shouldn't be trusting Danny with $50 million of taxpayers' money to buy what she thinks good pharmaceuticals might just be. But we're not quite done with the whole skybox scandal, corrupt care, because Pete Guthrie came out swinging on a couple of different things in the last little while. On July 11th, in response to a query in regards to how did he get the hockey tickets, Pete Guthrie said, and I quote, "I was actually invited to games by the Premier's executive director, Rob Anderson, and Justice Minister Mickey Amery, but I appreciate your interest. It was kind of you to ask," end quote. That is former infrastructure minister Pete Guthrie saying he was the reason why he got tickets to games was because Rob Anderson, the Premier's executive director, and Justice Minister Mickey Amery, who is on record as saying that he is good friends and family with Sam Mraiche, they were inviting at least Peter Guthrie, maybe other ministers, they haven't spoken up, to these hockey games, which is, again, a massive, if it's true, conflict of interest. Because Rob Anderson certainly had to know in the playoff series that happened a year ago, that MH Care was involved with the Atabay pharmaceutical purchase, because the government of Alberta was briefed on multiple different options in regards to how would they like to go about procuring medicine, if they're going to go about procuring medicine at all. Rob Anderson had to be knowing what the details of that were. Mickey Amery, close friend and family member, it's very difficult to imagine a universe where he wouldn't have been aware of all of these things. As the Premier's main lawyer, that's a fascinating little piece if it's true. But that's not the only bomb. Peter Guthrie had a very, very busy little week on this file, because on July 9th, he also tweeted out, on October 6th, 2022, Danielle Smith became Premier. Less than 2 months later, on December 1st, her office ordered AISH to purchase $70 million in sole source contract for non-domestic, and he called it Tylenol. So again, I got to give the win on the nomenclature to Danny. $10 million in admin fees, $10 million for useless product. That's Pete Guthrie saying that. $40 to $50 million still accounted for. And this is where it gets wild. J&J, presumably referring to Johnson & Johnson, the original manufacturer, the ones that make the for realsies Tylenol, was apparently passed over. The former AISH CEO and board were investigating, pushing for answers, trying to recoup the $50 million and renegotiate better deals. They were all fired. Is this prudent government or something else? It's time to restore integrity. Alberta deserves better, which brings us to Pete Guthrie on Canada Day. The closely watching folks caught this because Pete Guthrie tweeted out Happy Canada Day, and he's wearing a shirt. Oh, wonder what's going on with that shirt that he's wearing. Because if you look closely, that shirt is the PC Alberta shirt. That was July 1st. On July 5th, the official announcement came out. For immediate release, Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta has relaunched to restore trust, stability, and good governance. Calgary, Alberta, July 5th, 2025. The Progressive Conservative Party of Alberta has been officially relaunched, marking the return of a party focused on accountability, steady leadership, and putting Albertans first, not ideology or self-interest. Backed by sitting MLAs Pete Guthrie and Scott Sinclair, the revived PC party offers a clear, principled alternative to the chaos and uncertainty that have defined Alberta politics in recent years. Well, that's a spicy little meatball, that is. Now, it's worth noting that it was kind of the official launch was on July 5th. The soft launch, though, came on July 3rd when Pete Guthrie and Scott Sinclair appeared on Real Talk with Ryan Jesperson. And Danielle Smith was asked a couple of questions about that exciting news when she was announcing Alberta's getting a provincial police force again. We're getting a provincial police force.
Today, Emily Scott Sinclair and Peter Guthrie said they're looking to relaunch the Alberta PC Party. What's your reaction to that news, and are you concerned at all about either bleeding support from your base or potential floor crossing, something of the like?
Well, elections law makes it clear that new parties can't use the name of the former legacy parties of the UCP. And the reason for that is to avoid confusion with voters. So we expect the law to be followed, and we're going to be following up with Elections Alberta accordingly. But generally speaking, I mean, this is a province where there's always new parties forming, and if they can put forward do so in a legal way, then I think that always is a positive to be able to have lots of options. It's good for democracy.
Now, this is interesting, and it's interesting for a bunch of different reasons, because what Danielle Smith has done in that statement is she said, oh, no. They don't get to use the PC legacy name. There's laws against that. We're going to talk about the laws in just a sec. But there's laws against it. They're not allowed to do it. We won't let it happen. But we welcome another political party. And that's a fascinating position to take because it's almost a tacit admission that Peter Guthrie and Scott Sinclair getting the PC Party of Alberta, the Progressive Conservative name, would be harmful. It is apparently high value enough that Danielle Smith feels the need to follow up to protect it. Now, it's worth noting the PC Party hasn't run any candidates since 2019. That gets to be relevant in just a minute. But it's a tacit admission that it would somehow be bad for the UCP if the PC Party of Alberta got to use the name that they already have reserved and want to use. It's a weird strategic choice to make. The smarter strategic choice to make, I would personally argue, is to say, yeah, no, great, they can have it. They want our leftovers. That's fine. That name's been that has not been a serious name in politics for the better part of a decade. If these guys want to take it, sure, whatever. You want my 85 Civic too while you're at it? I don't care. We're the United Conservative Party of Alberta. We are united. We are conservative. We are a juggernaut. And there's nothing that these two guys, who were kicked out, by the way, there's nothing that they can do to affect us. Because there are multiple iterations of the Wild Rose Party that have been existing in varying formats. But that's not the tactic that Danny chose to deploy. She chose instead to be like, whoa. They can't use that name. And Rick Bell, he kind of let his true colors show a little bit.
Do you think this is helpful to the idea of having a united conservative movement, to have another progressive, to have another party that in whatever form calls itself conservative?
Well, as you know, I mean, I had a long history with both parties. I was the campus club president of the Progressive Conservatives back in 92, 93, and I also was the leader of the Wild Rose Party. And we saw what happened. We saw that when the movement splits, the NDP win. And I think that that's where the majority of conservative voters are, is that they realize that we have two cultures that we brought together under a single umbrella. And we talk about the things that we can agree on, and we move forward with policies that get the consensus of the majority of the public. And we're going to continue doing that. And I think it's that approach that we take that is going to make the case to Albertans that they should stay supporting the United Conservative Party. And I'll leave it to others to argue their case. But I think the approach that we've taken has demonstrated success, and I'm expecting it to the next election too.
See, she almost gets to the real answer, the right answer there. I love so much the sigh, the frustration that Rick Bell lets out before he asked his question. But that was not the only question that he asked.
So we'll have a united conservative party mostly, and then a progressive conservative party of whatever dimension that will look like. Surely you, as the person who took over the leadership of the United Conservative Party from a person who pushed to have a united conservative party because of what we talked about a decade ago, what are your thoughts on the fact that we don't know where this is going, but if it's successful, we're going to go back to 2 instead of 1?
Well, as I mentioned, it's in elections law. It was my predecessor who passed that, saying that the name of the former legacy parties of the UCP could not be registered as new parties, and that is so that we do not have confusion for voters. And so we're going to raise that with the elections officials and remind them that that's what the law says, and we would expect that the law will be followed. What I would say is that we have always had multiple parties on the ballot. Even last time around, if you go and look at the number of parties that were on the ballot, I think there were 4 or 5 or 6 different conservative parties that were listed there. And I think our success demonstrated that people like the United Conservative Party. They like what we stand for. They like what we're doing. They want to vote for us. They've been voting. They've supported us in record numbers. We've had the highest attendance and highest revenue generating leaders dinners this year. We are out fundraising the opposition NDP, I think, by 3 to 1. So I feel like those are the measures that I am looking at, and we'll be prepared to make our case at the next election, no matter who ends up being on the ballot.
Well, these 2 people were part of your caucus, and now they aren't, and we won't relitigate that.
I guess we don't need to. But what is interesting is if we take a look at what the actual rules are, which is worth doing, because from the relevant legislation, the chief electoral officer shall not register a political party if in the chief electoral officer's opinion, if in the chief electoral officer's opinion, the name or the abbreviation of the name of the applying party so nearly resembles the name or the abbreviation of the name of a registered party as to likely be confused with the name or the abbreviation of that registered party. So PCAA would have to look a lot like UCP. A1, the proposed name, was the name of a registered party whose registration was canceled or whose name was changed since the last election. Last election being just a year ago. Well, that wouldn't apply here. Other than in relation to the registration of a successor party, the proposed name was the name of any registered predecessor party or so nearly resembles the name or the abbreviation of the name of any registered predecessor party as to likely be confused with the name or the abbreviation of the name of that registered predecessor party, or the proposed name or abbreviation is unacceptable to the chief electoral officer for any other reason. A2 might get him. It might get him. But the question that has to be asked then is, if the name is so completely unusable, why was it that the chief electoral officer approved the name to be reserved? People have tried to register party names, and it's been said, no, you can't register that name. But it is, with an expiry date of November 26, 2025, a reserved name on the Elections Alberta website. So there's still some questions that need to be resolved. And this is where we're going to turn to a CBC story, because this one kind of acknowledges the complexity that's involved here. This was posted on July 2nd, 2025. And it refers to Smith not liking it. Smith questioned whether the PC Association name could legally return because elections law restricts reusing the name of a predecessor to a merged party like the UCP. An Elections Alberta spokesperson wrote in an email to CBC News that the chief electoral officer would make a final determination on the party's proposed name during the registration process. So, balls in the air still. Going to be interesting to see how it plays out. Going to be interesting to see whether or not Pete Guthrie and Scott Sinclair are able to move the bar as far as they need to. And this brings us to we got to talk about the book bans again. And I don't believe that I have any audience members that are under the age of 18. But there's going to be some language that gets used here. So conduct yourselves accordingly. Sorry, in the middle of this, I have to make a note about that because that is something that's super fun. The book ban happened, and it was kind of front loaded because on the same day that that Danielle Smith launched the Alberta Next Panel, she decided to reframe the whole conversation, and she used a very incendiary word to describe the books. And we've talked about it. We re-upped both of our big episodes on the book ban on Friday. It should be the last episode before this one on the YouTubes or on the podcast thinger. The use of this word is not accurate, but here we go.
Did you find this survey result concerning?
I have to wonder if the individuals who responded that way had a chance to look at the materials. We made them available with a warning about graphic depiction. And if we have to make a warning label for adults to observe materials, then it should be pretty obvious that 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds shouldn't be seeing those materials. There's no benefit in giving graphic sexual material to children before they're old enough to understand what they're seeing. And that was what the policy is all about, is that we're looking to make sure that there's age-appropriate materials to teach kids about the basics of sexual reproduction at the right age in the right way. And some of those materials were clearly inappropriate. In fact, some of the books even said in the warning that they were not intended for an under 18 audience. So I think that we've taken the prudent approach, and I would hope anyone who has any doubt should go online and look at the materials for themselves. I think they would come to the same conclusion we have.
So out of the gates, no. None of the books that were highlighted said they were inappropriate until the age of 18. We went through all of those books. There was one that was 16, but to say that there was one that was like, 18. No, nobody under the age of 18 should be reading the book. That is not, we have not been able to validate that at all. So that's an important piece of context. Before we get into the press conference, this whole announcement has been a shit show, if you will, because it was announced that there was going to be an announcement about the book banning. There was a technical briefing on July 10th that was followed by a press conference. A technical briefing is where journalists attend and subject matter experts and policy people say, okay, here's the deal. Here's what's going on. This is what it's going to be. All right. Use that to write your story. And then you can ask questions at the press conference, and that way everybody can have their questions out. Technical briefings are almost always what are called embargoed. So if you attend one of these, you're not allowed to talk about what happened in the technical briefing until after a certain amount of time. You have to sign a little waiver saying as much. And if you don't follow those rules, you'll likely not be allowed to attend any of those again. Now, something about the technical briefing led reporters to believe that the ban was far more reaching than it actually is. To be clear, it's very, very far reaching, offensively so, ridiculously so. And we'll talk about that in a second. But it started off badly because more than a few media outlets released a story. We're going to throw up the screenshot that we have of the Globe and Mail that stated all books with explicit sexual content will be removed. But libraries will also no longer be able to provide students in grade 9 and below with any material that contains non-explicit sexual content, such as the depiction of bodies with references to genitalia, menstruation, puberty, or romantic relationships, including hand-holding and kissing. So that's the first thing that we have to address, because that went out because of the things that were produced in the technical briefing, presumably. That's what some of the journalists have said anyways. Let's take a look at what actually is included in the ministerial directive, because it's important. And one of the pieces that's really important is the definitions. So one of the terms is explicit sexual content. This means content containing a detailed and clear depiction of a sexual act. And then it provides some examples. It does not include non-sexual content, non-explicit sexual content, or any depiction or of any nature contained in religious texts or scriptures. So explicit sexual content out. There's some other definitions we got to talk about, because there's a definition for non-sexual content. It means content that is not sexual in nature, but includes, is not limited to, a depiction of bodies, body parts, or physical contact related to medical conditions, examinations, or treatment, a depiction of bodies, body parts, or physical contact not of a sexual nature, but related to biological functions or processes involving genitalia like puberty, menstruation, pregnancy, or breastfeeding, a depiction of sexual acts or any biological function or process that is for information and is not narrative, such as a description contained in technical or reference materials, such as dictionaries or encyclopedias, a depiction of non-sexual activities that may be related to sexual acts or romantic relationships, such as kissing or hand-holding, indirect references to sexual acts, or the implication or suggestion that sexual acts have occurred or are occurring. Bouncing back to the first slide we just showed you, non-explicit sexual content means content containing a depiction of a sexual act that is not detailed or clear, but does not include non-sexual content or any depiction of any nature contained in religious texts or scriptures. So again, the big thing is if it's in a religious text, it's okay. The school authority must not permit any children or any students enrolled in a grade level below grade 10 to access school library materials containing non-explicit sexual content. So again, we've got a boatload of different definitions that are going on here, and it's very easy to understand how they could be misinterpreted. The stories went out. Demetrius Nicolaides ended up tweeting out a statement saying, here's what's allowed, here's what's not. So for grades K through 9, explicit sexual content, detailed and clear depictions of sexual acts, not accessible. Non-explicit sexual content, depiction of a sexual act that is not detailed or clear, not accessible. Non-sexual content, example, puberty, menstruation, pregnancy, breastfeeding, biological functions, encyclopedias, textbooks, kissing or hand holding for grades K through 9 is accessible. For grades 10 through 12, all the same things. Explicit sexual content, not accessible. Non-explicit sexual content, if it's developmentally appropriate, that's allowed. That's depiction of a sexual act that is not detailed or clear. And non-sexual content, all of the puberty, menstruation, the academic sexual content, that is accessible from grades 10 to 12. And here's where I'm going to throw in an unscripted bit. Because for kids K through 9, and at this point we're talking up to 15 and 16-year-olds, if we look at the definitions that are used in this ministerial directive, kids K through 9 wouldn't be allowed to read the ministerial directive that says that they're not allowed to read about some of these things, which is bonkers in so many levels. Now, some people have said, well, maybe it's just graphic novels. Nope. Because if we take a look at the definition of depiction in the ministerial directive, it means a passage, illustration, photographic or digital image, video, or audio file. So a written passage, if it has the words that describe explicitly a sexual act, not allowed in schools. So there's a lot of books that are on the chopping block here. And the piece about, well, the K through 9 doesn't get to have kissing or hand holding, which was originally reported, and we're going to get into that in just a sec. That is, that's not true. And it's become a bit of a distraction, because the reality is there are a boatload of books. We talked about a bunch of them. We talked about Catcher in the Rye. We talked about Go Ask Alice. We talked about anything pretty much that Stephen King has ever written. Those books, presumably, all now have to be gone through and removed by October 1st of the next school year, all the while teachers are preparing to strike. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But where it gets to be really apparent what a dumpster fire of a thrown together policy this was, is Dimitris Nicolaides was explicitly asked about the hand holding and the kissing part in the press conference. And this is his answer.
Minister, I understand that the focus today is on restricting sexually explicit content from school libraries. But can you explain then why it's important to also prohibit books that are non-explicit sexual content as it's being defined? From what we're being told, students in grade 9 and below will not be allowed any material that contains the depiction of bodies with references to puberty, menstruation, breastfeeding, or romantic relationships, including hand-holding and kissing. So I'm trying to figure out what that is doing here today.
The objective, again, is to make sure that any kind of presentation of sexual material is done in an age-appropriate way. That's the entire focus of the policy that we're developing. That's the entire focus of the ministerial order here. And we, again, want to make sure that students have an opportunity to, of course, explore these topics, but we want to make sure that that's done in an age-appropriate way.
Follow up?
Yeah, okay, I understand. It's just the age appropriateness. I mean, at grade 9, these are topics that kids are talking about, right? So when they read a book, that's something they're going to want to know about.
He was straight up asked. We were told that it's not going under grade 9. They don't get to talk about the menstruation, puberty, romantic relationships, including hand holding or kissing. That was literally in the question. And either Nicolaides was sleeping his way through the press conference and he didn't hear the question that was actually asked of him, or he didn't understand it. Neither of which are great options when we're talking about banning books. You would think that the minister would be appropriately briefed and would have an appropriate level of knowledge for the thing that he's about to unleash. But either he wasn't listening to the question, or he didn't know that he was being asked that question and the answer was that he was giving was wrong. But also came up at the press conference the question of the religious texts. Why are there exemptions for religious texts?
I wondered if you could explain why religious texts are excluded from scrutiny here, and if you can clarify for us, because we were not able to get an answer to this in the technical briefing, what is a religious text? What qualifies under that category?
I think we would have a broad understanding of religious texts, of course. The key texts of our major religions. Of course, religion can be something that is more widely interpreted. So if there's any concern with that interpretation, be happy to explore that. There's always opportunities to make amendments and modifications to the ministerial order. Our general view and perspective, however, though, is, of course, religious texts are important components of preserving an individual's freedom of religion. So we want to ensure that that material is not being limited as a key component of someone's religion, faith, and practice.
So freedom of religion gets a pass. Freedom of expression, when it's age appropriate, does not. And this is the other piece of the conversation that's really, really important to highlight, because there are the bad faith hacks out there who have tried to take the line of anybody who's saying, whoa, we shouldn't be banning books that are age appropriate for age appropriate demographics. They're trying to say kids should be viewing, well, they're trying to show the kids the bad things and corrupt them because they've all got their agenda. No, that's not what it is at all. If a book is age appropriate for an age and a kid wants to read that book, that should be the end of the conversation. But it's not. And apparently freedom of religion is a get out of jail free card when it comes to the depiction of explicit sexual acts, because that's what it's been given the exemption for. It's being given the exemption for if it's a religious text that has explicit sexual acts. Yeah, we're still going to let that happen. So you have to wonder, what's the priority here? What's the balance that's being struck? Are we trying to protect kids from the explicit things, or are there certain circumstances where those explicit things in the proper context with a proper age are appropriate? Because the argument seems to be, well, if it has to do with religion, then it can be appropriate. And that shouldn't be the only circumstance where an age-appropriate content should be accessible by the appropriate ages. I could go on forever about that one. But there were, if you thought it was bad that Nicolaides apparently hadn't read the contents of his own ministerial directive to the point where he wasn't able to answer the question about whether or not this stuff is going to be blocked for kids under grade 9, it gets worse.
I'm just wondering if you personally read the 4 books that kicked this whole thing off.
I have not. I'm struggling to find the time to read a quarter of any book, let alone 4 books, but I haven't had the opportunity, no.
He hasn't read the books that he's banning, the books that he's calling so outrageous. He hasn't read them. He has no idea what the context is. He has no idea what's going on in the books because he hasn't read them. But they're so horrifying. They're so bad. The books that he hasn't read, they have to be banned. This is how policy happens in the province of Alberta now. Not based on information, but on rumors and innuendo. And there were a couple of the people that showed their faces. We're going to talk about one of them because the board chair for the Red Deer Public Schools decided to show up and show her ringing endorsement of this policy.
And we must be mindful of this. If a passage or image isn't appropriate for the front page of a newspaper or a billboard on the side of the highway, then it shouldn't be available to students in K-12 learning environments.
I don't even know what to do with that. If you can't put it on a billboard on a highway, then you shouldn't be, it shouldn't be available to kids K through 12. If I wanted to go out and rent a billboard and put up a picture of male or female genitalia straight out of Grey's Anatomy, you bet your bottom dollar it would not get approved to go on that billboard. This is part of the reason why, when you're driving up and down the QE2, the vast majority of the really offensive billboards that show the graphic materials about abortion are on private land on private billboards. You couldn't put up anything showing male or female genitalia on any public billboard. That's a very different environment than a learning environment that's being supervised by teachers and librarians. And the fact that the chair of the school board for Red Deer Public Schools can't seem to grasp that concept is horrifying. It truly, truly is horrifying. You can't put up depictions of abuse on billboards. You can't put up depictions of the loneliness and the trauma that kids who experience abuse are left with on billboards or on the front page of a newspaper. And to try to make the argument that if you can't put it on a billboard, it's not appropriate in a school is an incredibly myopic view of how learning works. Do I personally believe that I should be able to put a billboard with the matching male and female genitalia from Grey's Anatomy or any other anatomy book? No, of course not, because there is a reasonable likelihood that there's going to be kids too young to grasp the context of that who maybe get a little bit confused by that. But that's not what she said. She said if you can't put it on a billboard, kids from K to 12 should not have access to it. I'm going to play the clip again, just so I'm not accused of taking it out of context.
And we must be mindful of this. If a passage or image isn't appropriate for the front page of a newspaper or a billboard on the side of the highway, then it shouldn't be available to students in K to 12 learning environments.
The board chair of the public school board for Red Deer. That is not somebody who is there to make sure that kids, I'm sorry, kids in Red Deer, or even parents in Red Deer, that is not somebody who's there to make sure that kids in K through 12 are getting age-appropriate materials. That is a zealot. And in a second, I'm going to prove it to you. Because one of the questions that was asked of Minister Nicolaides is whether or not, why didn't we get to see a book ban list, Minister?
Can you please explain why a list of books has not been provided today beyond those four mentioned before? And again, authors for which take issue with their novels being called sexually explicit or age inappropriate.
Well, just on the last point, I know the author of the one book, I believe the title was Gender Queer, stated that she believes her material should not be available to children. I'm not sure about the authors of other books. I guess there's varied opinion and perspective on that. I don't have the authority within the Education Act to direct a school board to remove a particular book. I don't have that power. I don't have that authority. I don't believe it's necessary to make any kind of legislative changes to give the minister that kind of power and authority. But I do believe it is necessary and appropriate to provide guidelines. And to be honest with you, I'm surprised that we even need to provide these kind of guidelines. I thought that it was generally understood that we try to protect children from certain types of images. We have ratings on movies. given the nature of violence and sexual content that's displayed in movies. This already exists in so many different aspects of our society. I'm really surprised, to be honest, that I need to draft a ministerial order to say that you can't have books on your shelves with graphic sexual content for minor children.
You don't. Because, I mean, minor children is a fascinating approach. And again, I would refer you back to the previous episodes that we've done, because the graphic nature of the images is certainly being a little bit hyperbolic. But there, Minister Nicolaides says, oh, there's no list. Can't have a list. I don't have the authority, you see, to produce a list of books that have to be banned. There's these 4. Oh, they're bad. Haven't read them, though. What did the board chair for Red Deer have to say about a list?
I just want to get an idea of practically what this is going to look like.
I think, as the ministerial order states, and as the minister has advised, the main reason that this has come to light is to remove graphic, sexual, explicit content out of school libraries. There are several books that have already been named. There is several other books that are on a ban list that depict sexual graphic content that should not be available to minor youth students.
So Nicolaides doesn't have a list, but the boards do. And this is why the upcoming school board elections are so important. Because as that board chair from Red Deer Public Schools made clear, she's got herself a list. And when we take a look at what we found in our FOIP back from our June 22nd show, they do, in fact, have lists. They're importing them from the United States. And the real tragedy is they're using lists from a variety of sources. One of them is from far-right religious groups like Action for Canada. And we know that those lists were involved because they came back to us in the FOIP that we got back and did our June 22nd show on. But we also know that they've been going to organizations in the United States that have lists of books that are banned. We're talking about libraries that have said, it's ridiculous that these books have been banned. You can get them here. We're talking about organizations that are against censorship and book banning. And they've said these books should not be banned. That's the kind of list that we're talking about. And the fact that there's a school board chair that believes that bringing in these lists from these sources with no credibility other than moral outrage is an appropriate path. This is why the upcoming school board elections are so important, because as the folks from David Parker and his jolly band of Take Back Alberta Prairie Pirates have made it clear, they are coming for the municipal school boards. They're coming for the municipal elections. And this is a real-world, real-time example of why. Demetrius Nicolaides doesn't have the power to say, these are the books that have to be removed. School boards, though, that's a different question entirely. The upcoming school board elections are so critically important for our kids' ability to access age-appropriate material. But if the experts have said it's age-appropriate, if the teachers have said that it's age-appropriate, if the librarians have said that it's age-appropriate, if the publishers, if the authors, if the child psychologists have said that there are works that are age-appropriate, then it is not the business of a politician who can't be bothered to read the books he's banning, or a school board trustee who's too busy importing American rage bait. It's not their business to say all of these expertise with their training, they're wrong. I read on an angry website, therefore I'm punishing everybody. But the rhetoric clearly hasn't cooled down, because here's Danielle Smith on your province, your premier yesterday.
Well, I don't know. Pornography is a real problem for young adults. It's so accessible, and I don't think 7-year-olds should be exposed to pornographic images. Here's the thing, Wayne. If I am not permitted to describe to you the kind of images that 7-year-olds are seeing because it would offend your audience, then we shouldn't be showing them to 7-year-olds. I would encourage anyone with the parental warning label that we have online, go and look at the images yourself, and you'll be scratching your head wondering how it is any of these books ever got into elementary schools in the first place. So yeah, I think it's important that we make sure that young children are exposed to age-appropriate material only, and that they're not exposed to pornographic images early.
Look, we've got other issues regarding education, underfunding, overcrowded classrooms. Where do you draw the line? What's the balance?
Oh, well, I draw the line that you shouldn't have pornographic images shown to children. I just think that's pretty straightforward. The older that you get, and obviously once you get to be of age, you're able to experiment yourself. But when you're 7 years old, I think it's time for us to have a little bit more of a protective environment towards our kids, and that's what we're going to do.
So there's no evidence that any of the materials that we're talking about were shown to 7-year-olds. There's just no evidence of that. There is as we discussed in our June 22nd episode, there are some schools that have huge age ranges in them. But the notion that a 7-year-old kid is hanging out in the library completely unsupervised and finds one of these books it's simply, there's no evidence for it. There's no documented cases of it. And in all of the FOIT materials that have been released, there hasn't been any examples where that has been demonstrated to be the case. So again, we have Danielle Smith just engaging in bad faith lying to people to make them afraid, to make them lose all reason. That's what we've got going on. And it's really, really unfortunate, because it is ultimately something that is going to hurt kids. That's just the bottom line. There's no other way around it. And it's really unfortunate, because when you have materials that have been vetted by experts, and those experts have said for the appropriate ages, these materials can be of solace, they can be helpful, they can educate kids to recognizing when they're being abused. All of this stuff is critically important. But instead of recognizing those valid and important parts, we instead have the political leadership of the province of Alberta inventing stories. And it's kind of ironic that fairy tales are being used to ban children's books. The absolute kicker to this whole thing, and then I promise we do have a little bit of a good news piece to end things with, because that was a dirge. The absolute kicker to the incompetence on display by the provincial government, and I'm going to say the Minister of Education, is in the materials that were provided, including the ministerial directive. It included the ministerial directive. Here's the letter, the signature from Nicolaides saying, hey, everybody, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to ban these books that I haven't read. Therefore, I, Demetrius Nicolaides, the Minister of Education and Childcare, pursuant to Section 18(2)B of the Education Act, hereby make the ordering in the attached appendix being the standards for selection, availability, and access of school library materials. This is, again, the Minister of Education, who couldn't be bothered to read the books, couldn't clearly be bothered to read the thing he was signing, because he dated it at July 4th, comma, Alberta, Calgary 2025. He switched where he was supposed to put the date and the location. The Minister of Education didn't read the order he was signing clearly enough to get the location and the date right. Hard to imagine a better ending for that segment. And with that being said, I want to pivot to some good news, and then I'm going to rant for just a little bit, and then we'll be done. And then this will be a Lord of the Rings episode. I apologize to everybody. We got to talk about this because this is some rare good news. And I know that there are people, and I have said it myself, and we've had political scientists on the show who have said it. There is a creeping fascism that's happening in Alberta. That's just a statement of fact. But we're not all the way there yet. And this is really, really important to highlight, and it's really, really important to celebrate because it's probably one of the few things that can give us some hope. This is an injunction. This injunction was filed on June 27th, 2025. And this injunction stops the provincial government from going ahead with their harmful policies against trans youth. And I'm going to read a little bit of it because I think it's really, really important. The evidence shows that the only group that will be directly impacted by the ban are gender-diverse minors for whom hormone therapy is medically indicated. The evidence of both parties shows that the ban will benefit an even smaller subset of this already very small group of people, and that the individuals that are prescribed hormone therapy and later regret it. The harm that this group might suffer would arise only after they made an informed choice to obtain hormone therapy. Again, I appreciate that the ability to make an informed choice and the state of the science are an issue, but the evidence supports that informed choice is possible and that the doctors who prescribe hormone therapy do so with a careful eye to the needs of the patient and the risks of the treatment. I accept that some patients and their parents may have had a different experience and believe the treatment was initiated hastily and without full understanding of the consequences. However, based on my assessment of the evidence, it would be a stretch to conclude that because that may have been the experience of some, every doctor who practices gender-affirming care has abdicated their responsibilities and are choosing to ignore the strength of the science regarding gender-affirming care such that the ban is necessary to protect the public good. The evidence shows that there is a benefit to the public in issuing the injunction because it will allow this marginalized group to continue receiving medical care from trusted doctors and a broader team of health professionals, thereby avoiding the adverse consequences the ban will have on them, including interference with their autonomy, unwanted and permanent development, serious stress and anxiety, and further discrimination until the issues are decided on a full record at trial. In conclusion, I find that the professional standards of Alberta healthcare professions will protect the public interest while an interlocutory injunction is in effect. I agree with the applicants. In this case, the status quo protects the public interest through a web of public law and private law constraints on the provision of gender-affirming care, which the injunction would leave fully in place. I am satisfied the balance of convenience favors the granting of the injunction. That is the voice of reason emanating from Alberta's court system, and it should be celebrated. It should also be a damning indictment against all of the people who have advocated for these policies. Danielle Smith has a gift when it comes to bringing forward these socially regressive policies. She's got a real skill, and she's very, very good at finding what are colloquially referred to as pick-me's. And yes, at the book banning, there was a pick-me. And I'm not going to say their name because the whole reason that these pick-me's ignore the science and the evidence and the logic that, thank God, the judge who issued this injunction embraces is because these pick-me's are not out for the best interests of their community. They're not out for the best interests of anybody but themselves, and they just want attention. And so, no, I'm not going to be saying the names of any pick-me's on this show tonight or anywhere going forward, because they don't deserve it. They're throwing people under the bus. And I'm not going to have anything to do with it. All of this, though, did not stop the Premier of Alberta from trying to reframe and lie to her audience again.
Will you reconvene the legislature and pass the bill again that bans sex changes for minors, invoking the notwithstanding clause?
We're looking at all of our options, but I can tell you I think that the court was in error. That's part of the reason why we're taking it to court. The court had said that they think that there will be irreparable harm if the law goes ahead. I feel the reverse. I feel that there'll be irreparable harm to children that get sterilized at the age of 10 years old. And so we want those kids to have their day in court. We want those who were counseled to have sex change operations prematurely, who now feel like they weren't protected, to be able to be witnesses so that we don't make these kinds of mistakes. We have had long histories of governments making decisions that have caused this kind of harm. We had a sterilization of those who were committed to mental institutions that we had to do a major payout on. There are Indigenous women who are now challenging their sterilization that happened at the hands of doctors, that they want to make a criminal code provision on that. We shouldn't be capricious in taking away a person's right to be able to have children. So we want to battle this out. And the way you do that is you go to the higher levels of court. If we were to impose the notwithstanding clause, everything would stop. We actually think that we've got a very solid case. We think we've been measured. We think we've been evidence-based. And we think we're on the side of kids. So we want to see how long the process will play out. But we think it's really important for these issues to be debated in court.
So Danielle Smith's lying. Let's just get that out of the way. And I don't care. Earlier I was like, maybe she's lying. Maybe she just isn't truthing well. She's lying here. No kids have been getting sterilized at 10 years old. It simply doesn't happen. Puberty blockers are reversible. That's the ball game. That's the science. That's the evidence. Danielle Smith can make up whatever little story she wants to, but it doesn't change reality, except for the people that believe her, I suppose. No kids are getting sterilized at 10 years old. The government didn't take it to court. The government wrote the legislation, and then some families with the support of Skipping Stone and a gal took it to court, and they won their injunction. And an injunction like this, written in the compassionate way that it was, should be the kind of thing that gives a person who's pursuing something like this pause. Am I doing the right thing? Am I doing it for the right reasons? Is the judge correct that there are all of these mechanisms in place, and that in order for this legislation to make any sense, I would have to assume that doctors and physicians and psychologists and psychiatrists are maliciously going out of their way to counsel kids and their parents to do something that goes against every oath that they've ever sworn. That's not what Danielle Smith's doing. She's telling more stories. And then she's trying to say that the sterilization of kids, which isn't happening, is the same thing as what happened when there was the forced sterilization of handicapped folks and Indigenous people. Those were forced. There was no informed consent. There was no choice. It was a violent act forced on those people against their will. And for Danielle Smith to compare supportive care under medical supervision using the best science available with the forced sterilization of vulnerable groups is only Danielle Smith showing her hand. She has no argument left, so she's just going with the raw emotional arguments that she thinks will get people fired up. And that is well beneath what Albertans should accept and tolerate from somebody occupying the office of premier. But the good news is the courts worked. As long as the courts are still providing that voice of reason against the insanity emanating from the premier's office, we haven't gone full fascist yet. And that is something to be celebrated. And that's what we got. That is our very long show. Thank you to everybody who stuck around for almost 2.5 hours now. Couple of things that I want to clear the air with real quick. Next weekend, we're bringing back, we're evening the scoreboard. We got Dr. Dwayne Bratt coming back. He's weighing in on a lot of the issues that we talked about tonight, and a couple of other ones, including some of the weirdly provincial federal stuff that's happening with the Pierre Poilievre by-election, as well as a couple of other things. It's a really great conversation. I'm very excited to present it to you. It'll be up for our Patreon supporters in just a couple of days, but that's coming up right away. We got another, like I said earlier, like an hour and a half ago. We have another coal column that's coming. We're going to be taking a look at the history of coal mining, getting it into one little. We're not just going. We're going past 1976, where the Lougheed coal policy. We're going to go all the way into this thing in order to try to set some proper context for the greater conversation. That's going to be coming out later on this week as well. It'll go up first for our Patreon sponsors again. And the other thing is we got to ask for a little bit of help, and we're going to do all the plugs that we normally do at the end of the show. But we got to ask for a little bit of help. The Breakdown is going to be visiting. We want to do 2 live shows. We're committed. We're all in on this. We want to be in Edmonton on August 16th. We want to be in Calgary on August 23rd. We are looking for venues that'll fit 50 to 100 people. I don't know. If 50 people want to come hang out in either of those cities, that would be dope. But we're looking for venues. We need some help. We're having trouble finding venues that are available. Apparently, everybody has events going on. So if you live in Edmonton and you have a line on a space, maybe even a Denny's parking lot, I would be up for that. That we can have a little bit of a live show in. Please drop us an email at info@thebreakdownab.ca or send us a DM, whatever your preferred method of communication is. But we really want to make this happen. So if we can do a live show, fantastic. And if not, well, then we'll just find a space in a nice restaurant and we'll go there and just meet people. It'll be fun. So that's the plan. But we need help finding that space. So that's the big ask. If it doesn't matter if it's a community hall, I mean, a little theater space, cozy, that'd be great. But a little community hall would be fantastic. Anything, we'll folding chairs, whatever, we'll make it work. Let us know. We're looking for suggestions. We are, we do a reasonably good job of podcasting and deep diving on Alberta politics. Event planners, not so much. But we're going to be there. I swear, we will be in Edmonton on August 16th, no matter what. It's just a question of where. So, and we'll find something to do in Calgary as well. So there's the big ask. Now the regular plugs. If you appreciate the kind of content that we are trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love nothing more than if you signed up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. Price of a fancy cup of coffee or a muffin a month. It all goes towards the FOIP stuffs. It goes towards paying for a venue in a month and change. So all of that is good things. So you can do that at patreon.com. If you are somebody who is maybe not so much into the long-term monthly commitments, then you can also, you have the option of sending us an e-transfer to info@thebreakdownab.ca to help us continue to do the things that we do. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
It's such a palate cleanser, though, right? Like we do 2.5 hours on, oh my God, everything is awful. And we get to have that little bit of shared levity. I want to say a big thanks to everybody who has been hanging out in the chat for this long. This is wild. So thank you to everybody there. And that's it. That's all. That's what we got. We got the Dr. Dwayne Bratt episode. Hopefully we'll have another episode of that. We're going to take a little short break at the end of July, beginning of August, where we might do miss 2 weeks of shows, just to give us a chance to organize live shows. But that's it. Thank you all so much. If you're on the YouTubes, subscribe, do the little bell thing. The comments and the sharing of the things, all good. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, then little star things and leave a review. And we will be back with Dr. Dwayne Bratt next Sunday. So until then, take care of each other and keep the conversation going.
Mm-hmm.